I'm giving information on how to effectively love the other person.
Yeah.
But you have to decide. But the Christian challenge is to have the same attitude Jesus had. Philippians chapter 2, let this attitude be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who though he was God, didn't cling to his rights as God, but he emptied himself and became a man.
Yeah.
And once he got on level ground with us, he stepped down to death for us.
Absolutely.
Let that attitude be in you.
Welcome, TBN UK family. We all need advice on love and relationships every so often. Joining me is the author of one of the best-selling books of all time on the very topic of love and relationships, selling over 20 million copies. The 5 Love Languages has been on the New York Times bestseller list for almost 20 years and is full of wisdom from this well-known marriage counselor, pastor, and motivational speaker who specializes in encouraging people to establish long-lasting relationships. With his radio programs airing more than 400 stations, we have him here today to talk with us. So please welcome Dr. Gary Chapman. Hello, welcome.
Well, thank you, Emily. Great to be with you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here in London and be able to make time for the interview today. It's such a blessing. How have you been enjoying England so far?
Absolutely wonderful. Incredible. Even the weather's been nice.
Yes, you're here at a very good time indeed. Well, Dr. Gary, you've written a book called The 5 Love Languages, and I'm sure many people who are watching know this book and have used it, especially in their own marriages and relationships. But I'd love for you just to take us all the way back. Before you wrote this book, what did you want to do with your life and career, even before the idea of an author was even a thought for you?
When I finished my seminary and my PhD degree, I really wanted to be a teacher. And my dream was to teach in a seminary in Nigeria and train nationals to reach their country.
Right.
And that was my passion. And we got turned down by the mission board because of my wife's health.
Right.
And she was feeling guilty. I'm keeping you from doing what you want to do, But, we make our plans, but God directs our steps. And that was not the way God intended me to spend my life.
Yeah.
Instead, I spent it in a local church for 50 years,
Wow.
counseling people, helping them in their marriages, as well as helping them in their relationship with Christ. And the books have flown out of that. They tell me I've written over 50 books. I don't count them. And they go all over the world. I was in Hungary, and they translated 32 of my books in Hungarian.
Wow.
And so one night I was sitting there and my wife was crying. I was opening up a box of books from another country because we pray for that country. And she was crying. I said, honey, what's wrong? She said, nothing's wrong. I just remember we want to be missionaries. And now your books are all over the world.
Yeah, wow.
I said, okay, God, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
That's amazing. Wow, that's so powerful. And it just shows, when we trust God with every single step, he does just open doors that we don't even imagine.
Absolutely.
And it's incredible to look where you are now as, an author of such a valuable book to so many. And as you said, it's a book that has gone around the world. But for people that may not know, the 5 Love Languages outline how we can experience and express love to our loved ones. And you've split it into 5 different categories. So I'd love for you just to take us through them quickly, just for anyone who may not understand really what it means or what they are.
Yeah. Well, all of us agree, I think, that one of our basic emotional needs is the need to feel loved. But the problem is what makes one person feel loved doesn't make another person feel loved. And so I discovered there's 5 different ways that people express love. And all of us have a language. And one of these is more important than the other 4. So one of them is words of affirmation. You look nice in that outfit.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you did. It's just using words to affirm the other person. I think it's Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 21 that says, life and death is in the power of the tongue. We can kill people by the way we talk, or we can give them life. And for some people, this is their language. If you give these people critical words, harsh words, angry words, it's like a dagger in their heart because you're taking their love language and using it in the opposite way. So words of affirmation, acts of service, doing something for the other person that they would like for you to do. In a marriage, that would be such things as cooking meals, washing dishes, vacuuming floors, mowing grass, walking the dog, changing the baby's diaper, washing the car, anything. There's an old saying, actions speak louder than words. Well, if this is their love language, actions will speak louder than words.
Yeah.
And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got for me. And the gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. But it's not the thought left in your head. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head, you know? So there's gifts, and then there's quality time, giving the person your undivided attention. I do not mean husband and wife sitting on the couch watching television. Someone else has your attention.
Yeah.
But the TV's off. The computer's down. We're not answering our phone. We're giving each other our undivided attention. Or you can be walking down the road and talking, or going out to eat, assuming you talk. So quality time, and then physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies, hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. And long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love, by physical touch. So, you know, if a husband's love language is words of affirmation, and the wife doesn't give him any words of affirmation, though she may be speaking acts of service, she may be cooking meals and doing things, and she's loving him in her mind, but he's not getting it because his language is words.
Right.
So the basic idea is you have to learn your own language, learn the other person's language, and then choose to speak it.
Yeah.
Because love is a choice.
Yeah.
You know, this is information on how to do it, but you have to have an attitude of love. That I'm here in this relationship to enrich your life. Anything I can do to help you. So if I find out that this is your love language, I'm going to learn to speak it and meet that need in your life. Husband and wife do that together, they have a good marriage.
Oh, that's so good. So this was based out of your years of marriage counseling. So when did the moment really click for you when you realized that the people that were coming to you asking for help, everyone was kind of mentioning these different areas of wanting to feel love or express love. So what was it like actually putting the book together and you know, creating the book that we have today?
Yeah, well, it all started many years ago when a couple came in. I didn't know them. And she said, Dr. Chapman, let me just tell you a few things about us. We don't argue. We don't have any money problems. And she went on with 2 or 3 more things. I was thinking, well, did you come in here to tell me what a good marriage you have? And then she started crying, and she said, the problem is I don't feel any love from him. We're like roommates living in the same house. He does his thing, I do my thing. Nothing going on between us. And I just feel so empty inside. And I don't know how long I can go on like this. Well, I looked at her husband, and he said, I don't understand her. I do everything I can to show her that I love her. And she says she doesn't feel loved. I said, well, what do you do? He said, I get home before she does every afternoon. I start the meal. And then sometimes if I'm not through, she'll help me. Then we eat. And he said, I wash the dishes every night. And Thursday nights, I vacuum the floor. And Saturday, I mow the grass, and I wash the car, and I help her with the laundry. I was beginning to wonder, what does this woman do? He was doing everything. He said, I do all of that. And she says she doesn't feel loved. And I knew he was sincere. And she said, he's right. He's a hard worker, but we don't ever talk. Wow. We haven't talked in 20 years. He's always mowing the grass, washing the dishes, vacuuming the floors.
Right, yeah.
And that's the first time I realized here was a sincere husband. Yeah. In his mind, he was doing everything he knew to do to speak love to his wife, and a wife who didn't get it. And after that, I heard similar stories over and over again. Finally, I thought, there's got to be a pattern to this. Yeah. So I just read several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and asked myself the question, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. Wow. And then I later called them the 5 love languages. I started using it in my counseling. If you want her to feel love, you've got to learn to speak her language. If you want him to feel love, you've got to learn to speak his language. And I would help them discover their love language and challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes, Emily, they would come back in 3 weeks and say, this is changing everything. Wow. The whole climate's different. Yeah. And so probably 5 years later, I thought, if I could put this concept in a book and write it in the language of the common person, maybe I could help a lot of couples I would never have time to see in my office. Yes, little did I know, as you said earlier, it's sold 20 million copies, been translated in over 50 languages around the world. So it's a God thing,
Definitely.
Really.
Yeah. So good. So what would you say is your love language?
Words of affirmation.
Me too.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
You're doing great, by the way. I'm loving all of your answers.
Well, you're looking mighty nice,
Ah,
too.
thank you. Look at us practicing this. This is great. And what about your wife? What's her love language?
Acts of service.
Oh, really? Okay, so what do you do around the house then?
Yeah, well,
to
here's
show
the
that?
deal with us. I didn't know anything about love languages in
Right.
the early years. And so in the early part of our marriage, I would give her words of affirmation because we tend to speak our own language.
Yeah.
And I would tell her how nice she looked and how I appreciated what she did.
Yeah.
I probably told her a dozen times a day, honey, I love you. I am so glad I married you. And one night she said to me, you keep on saying I love you. If you love me, why don't you help me? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you don't ever offer to wash dishes or vacuum floors or clean the toilet. You don't offer to do anything. I didn't say this, Emily, but I was thinking, what are you talking about? My mama did that. We bring our history with us, you know.
And what we experienced when we were growing up, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If mama did it, you expect our wives to do it. And so I
Right.
say to men, listen, man, you did not marry your mama.
Yeah.
You know, you married another lady. So acts of service. So I wash dishes, I vacuum floors, I take out the trash, and she tells me I'm the greatest husband in the world.
There you go. Perfect. And I think what's so important, you mentioned it earlier, is that it's a choice. You know, we can hear about these love languages. We can think, yep, that's great. I know which one is mine. I know which one is my spouse. But if we're not actually choosing to love our partner in that way, then that's just good information to know, isn't it? So actually the importance of choosing to do it and serving one another, isn't it? Whether that's through words or through acts of service or quality time, it's so important.
Yeah, exactly. I had a man say to me, he said, my wife and I read your book. We took the quiz in the back of the book. We learned each other's language. Her language is acts of service. But I'm going to tell you and her, if it's going to take my washing dishes and my vacuuming floors for her to feel loved, she can forget that. And I said, that's your choice.
Yeah.
If you choose to live with a wife who doesn't feel loved, that's your choice. I said, I much prefer to live with a wife who feels loved.
Yeah.
I do wash dishes and vacuum floors, etc. But it's exactly right. I'm giving information on how to effectively love the other person.
Yeah.
But you have to decide. But you know, the Christian challenge is to have the same attitude Jesus had. Philippians chapter 2, let this attitude be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who though he was God, didn't cling to his rights as God, but he emptied himself and became a man.
Yeah.
And once he got on level ground with us, he stepped down to death for us. Let that attitude be in you.
Yeah.
So if we have the attitude of Christ, and this is what changed my marriage, you know, and I realized this, I had the attitude, I said, okay, God, help me to do these things. You help me to do these things. You ask God to give you the attitude of Christ, he'll answer that prayer. And then you make the choice to learn the language of the other person. And it may be difficult for you. For example, if you didn't receive words growing up, it'll be hard for you to, what do I say? I don't know how to do it. But the good thing is, you can learn to speak any one of these languages as an adult, even if you didn't receive them as a child. And when you and the husband and wife learn to speak each other's language, you both become winners, you know?
Yeah.
And then you can turn and bless the world with whatever talents God has given you. God did not ordain marriage to make people miserable. God's intention was we would have the attitude of Christ toward each other. And you know, 3 questions can make this practical. These made it practical for me when I started asking her, honey, what can I do to help you? And what can I do to make your life easier? And how can I be a better husband?
Wow.
And when I asked those questions, she gave me answers.
Yeah.
And then she started asking me those questions. Yeah. So you get it going that way, you're going to have a good marriage.
What's so interesting in what you said, especially about those last 3 questions, is the world can tell us something so different about relationships and what love can look like. The world can tell us, you're in a relationship just to, receive love. I don't have to do anything. And the act of love being selfless can sometimes be not really talked about much, really, in the world that we live in, and especially in the generations that are coming up now. It's very much about self and what I need and what I'm after in a relationship. Yeah. But actually what you're saying is very countercultural, what we see. But as you've mentioned, it's from the Bible. And that's what Jesus did when he came to earth, is he came to our level. So in those 3 questions that you've mentioned at the end, Have you ever shared that with people and they've just been stunned? Like, well, I don't want to know those things. I don't want to help or serve in that way, because it's quite a shock, isn't it? Especially with what we're seeing in the world nowadays.
Usually they don't admit it, but there are many people who have a selfish attitude.
Yeah.
Now, all of us by nature are self-centered. So we take care of ourselves. We eat right, sleep right, exercise, and that's okay. But when we live with an attitude of selfishness, I'm in this relationship for what I'm getting out of it.
Yeah.
Two selfish people will never have a good marriage.
Yeah.
But by nature, we have to go against the old nature
Yeah.
and allow the nature of Christ to come into our lives. And those are two extremes, selfishness or love. And a person who is selfish, Christ can transform them and give them an attitude of love.
Yes.
And it makes all the difference, not only in their marriage, but in everything else they do.
Yeah, and actually, especially for a Christian couple, it also, when they're on that same level and that same page, it means that when they're working together for the kingdom, whether that's in church or mission, it will also impact all areas, won't it?
Absolutely. And it's especially important for children. I say to parents, the question is not, do you love your children? The question is, do your children feel loved?
Wow.
And if you're not speaking that primary language of that child, they will not feel loved, even though you're loving them in some other ways. I remember a 13-year-old young man had run away from home. He ended up in my office, and he said to me, my parents don't love me. They love my brother, but they don't love me.
Wow.
I knew his parents. I knew they loved him. The problem is they had never discovered his language and weren't speaking the right language.
Wow.
So for parents, this has a tremendous application because we want our children to grow up feeling loved by their parents. If they do, they're emotionally healthy. If they grow up not feeling loved, they grow up with many internal emotional struggles. And many times in the teenage years, they go looking for love in all the wrong places. So this is really important for parents.
Definitely. And, you touched there on parents, and you've actually written a version of the 5 love languages for parents and children, haven't you? And for teenagers as well. And one main thing that we should really mention when talking about these 5 love languages is it's never too late to start practicing it in your relationships with your children or your spouse, right? Because I'm sure you've counseled people who have been married for years and years and years and thought, well, this is just how we are. This is just what our marriage looks like. And there could be people watching even now that feel like that's all good for newly married people or, relationships that are happening nowadays. But really, this is something for everyone.
You're right. It's never too late. In fact, I have couples almost every week when I do marriage conferences in the U.S. come to me and say, Gary, we just want to tell you that book saved our marriage. I mean, we were at the end of the rope. We just thought there's no hope for us. We're too different. And we read that book, and the lights came on, and we realized how we'd been missing each other.
Wow.
And we took the quiz. We learned each other's language. We started speaking it. It literally saved our marriage. So because this is such a deep need on the human level for us, it does save marriages. And you're right. It's never too late to start. And even with a child, you can always apologize, In fact, we in the relationship, we need to apologize. I wrote another book called The 5 Languages of Apology. Because none of us are perfect. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to learn how to apologize and then learn how to forgive so that we can go and continue in our relationship.
And Dr. Gary, you've traveled all around the world speaking to many people about marriage and especially about how to love one another. Have you found that maybe different cultures share love differently or receive love differently? So what's that been like kind of as you've traveled the world and just met, I'm sure, thousands and thousands of couples?
This was the biggest shock for me, that this love language book has gone into so many languages. Because before I went to seminary, I did an undergrad and a master's degree in anthropology, cultural anthropology, studying cultures. So when the first publisher came, happened to be Spanish, and they wanted to get the rights to publish it, I said to my publisher, I don't know if this works in Spanish culture, And they said, well, they've read the book, and they want to publish it. I said, well, okay, let's do it. And it became their bestseller.
Wow.
So now I pretty much believe these 5 are fundamental to human nature.
Right.
Now, the dialects of these languages will differ in different cultures. You know, physical touch, for example. There are cultures where if they come up even to a friend, they'll kiss you on this cheek and kiss you on this cheek. Well, that's fine. It's physical touch. And it's fine in that culture. We wouldn't do that in our culture. So I think the dialects in which you speak the languages will differ in the cultures.
Right.
But it does seem that the 5 love languages are pretty much fundamental to human emotions.
Yeah, and to love in general, really, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
So, and it's about learning the dialect, which I like, you know, learning that and what your partner needs. You know, but there might be people watching who may not be married yet, who may be dating or, you know, thinking about getting married. So how can they apply these 5 love languages to their life in that season that they're
Yeah. Well, I wrote a special book for them, The 5 Love Languages for Singles.
in? You've done it all, Dr. Gary. You've done it all.
I've covered the field. But I apply it to their parents, first of all. Do you feel loved by your parents?
Wow.
This can explain why you do or don't. Do your parents feel loved by you? They have a love language. I apply it how this applies to college roommates, to dating partners, to work associates, you know, to siblings, your brothers and sisters. This can transform relationships that might not be very close or fractured, because everybody needs to feel loved. And if we understand their love language and we choose to speak it, we can see fractured relationships healed.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you mentioned there, whether it's a work colleague or a relative or a friend, that we can apply love languages. But what if we just don't get along with people? What if there is just maybe an issue between people where they just don't see eye to eye? I know you mentioned this in your book as well, but I'd love you just to touch on it about, you know, loving people that we hate or really can't stand. What would you say then?
I remember when a lady asked me, how do you love a husband that you hate?
Wow.
I said, keep this in mind. Love doesn't start with a feeling. It starts with an attitude. And I have often challenged people through the years in my office that are in those situations because their spouse is not loving them. In fact, the spouse may be harsh to them or just ignoring them. What if, for 6 months, you chose, with the help of God, to speak their love language once a week for 6 months and just see what happens? You're loving a person that doesn't love you. You're loving a person you don't have positive feelings for, but you have an attitude of love. You're saying to God, I know you love them, and I'm in a good position to be your agent. So pour your love into my heart, Romans chapter 5. Holy Spirit pours your love into my heart. I'll be your representative to love them. You do that over a 6-month period, over and over again. I've seen that other person just begin to melt.
Wow.
And eventually come to say, well, what can I do for you?
Yeah. Amazing.
You can't guarantee that, you know, but if you do that for 6 months, you can look yourself in the mirror and you can look God in the face and know that you have done the most powerful thing you could possibly do to influence them in a positive way. So, that's the approach I take. And I've seen many marriages reborn when one person decided to express love.
And it goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, just to go from that selfless place of willing to serve. And, you know, whether that is someone that, you know, we have certain feelings of anger towards, but showing love can really, as you said, it just changes your heart as well, doesn't it? And you'll see over time that it will just benefit that relationship. And how do you think that these 5 love languages can maybe affect our perception of how God loves us? Or maybe how we see
I actually
that?
wrote a book called God Speaks Your Love Language because people kept asking me that question.
Wow.
What is God's love language?
Yeah.
I just went through the whole Bible again. God speaks all 5 of them fluently.
I like that.
And
He does.
here's what I've observed. When I've looked at conversion experiences, how people become Christians originally, there's a tie-in between that and your love language. For example, Saul on the road to Damascus, it was physical. I mean, God knocked him off his horse, you know, and he blinded him, and he got his attention, and he was anti-God, anti-Christ. And so these kind of people will often have a traumatic experience that will affect their body. I mean, they will say, you know, I was just sitting there minding my own business in church, and all of a sudden, my body started shaking, and I started crying, and I just felt God was putting his arms around me. Well, not everybody has that kind of experience. But if physical touch is your language, you may well have that kind of experience. A quality time person far more likely to come to God. They just start reading the Bible. They start reading Christian books. And all of a sudden, one morning, they say, Lord, I believe. Forgive me and come into my life. It wasn't anything physical. It was that quality time, or our words of affirmation that they got from the Scriptures. So there's a parallel there. And here's the other thing. Once we become Christians, we tend to express our love to God in our love language.
Right.
So if words of affirmation is our language, we just give God words of praise and thanksgiving. If physical touch is our language, it's easy for us. We raise our hands when we sing. We get into it physically. So it's a very fascinating study.
It is, yeah, definitely. And actually, as you're talking that, you can see those parallels. And you know, maybe we've just not thought about that before, actually. But the way, how are we showing love to God? I love that. That's really good. And as you've mentioned, you've wrote a book on it, so that's so useful. So if people want to dig into that a bit deeper, that they can look that up. And Dr. Gary, I know you've mentioned in your book of the 5 love languages that when you would go speaking at seminars or at events, people would come and ask you after for some marriage advice.
Yeah.
So when you're traveling, does that happen? Do people always come up to you and ask?
It does. It does. Usually I'm signing books. I don't have a whole lot of time to talk, but they do. And if they hang around and everybody's gone, I'll hear their story.
Wow.
You know.
So how do you do it then? How do you write this many books and help this many people? How do you do it all? What are your little secrets that
you know? I don't know how, apart from God. Every single day, I'm saying to God, "Give me wisdom." Give me energy. Give me voice. Yeah. Because those are the 3 things that are absolutely necessary. And years ago, really right after I finished college, I learned a huge lesson. John 15, verse 5, Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branches, you stay connected to me, you bear fruit. And then he said, without me, you can do nothing. And that so broke my heart. And to the reality that without God, I can do nothing. So that's why I ask for wisdom, because there's 1,000 things you can do, but you can't do everything. Give me wisdom on what I do, and give me energy to do it, and give me voice, because so much of my life is speaking and counseling. So, you know, all God asks is that we take whatever we have and put it in His hands. And when we do it and dedicate it to Him, then our lives become fruitful. All kind of different areas. They don't have to be pastors and teachers and all that. We just give whatever we've got to God, because God has a plan for every one of us. He wants to use us in His kingdom. And understanding that and depending on Him and asking Him constantly to give you an attitude of love, so that everybody you encounter, you want to have a positive impact on their lives.
That's so good. Well, Dr. Gary, thank you so much for all of your years that you've spent putting time into these books, and especially into the 5 love languages, because it's really blessed so many people all around the world. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for being with us today and sharing. It's been so helpful, and, you know, just sharing with us the importance of finding out our spouse's love language and how they receive love, and even for the people around us, you know, it's so useful. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like more information, then it's on the screen for you now. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Until next time, goodbye.